Beyond Kent State, the four shots that shook the nation and the impact that they had. Two students, along with many other American citizens, peacefully protested the Vietnam War and the draft in 1970, holding up anti-war signs and expressing their First Amendment right to peacefully assemble. Two students passed by the protests on that Kent State University campus, simply making their way to class on that average spring afternoon. All four students were killed that fateful day. My aunt, Diane Chen, attended the school at the time and was only a freshman when the protests and subsequent shootings took place. The Kent State University shootings left a mark on Diane Chen because they made her forever skeptical of the media's portrayal of events when she saw how the event was covered in its aftermath. The American government's objective for becoming entangled in the Vietnam conflict, beginning in 1964 and ending in 1973, was to contain the communist rule of Vietnam. The goal of a communist government is to create a society centered on one-party rule and the public ownership of goods. The communist society would theoretically exist without social or economic classes or political ideology interfering. Meanwhile, capitalism is when a country's goods, trades, and industry are controlled by private sectors for profit. The clash of the two ideologies, capitalism and communism, began during the late 19th century. By the time President Richard Nixon came to power in 1969, American soldiers were still dying in Vietnam without much evident achievement of America's initial goal. The public grew impatient and irritable in regards to the war. There was no clear end in sight, and that frightened and angered a great deal of citizens. Towards the middle of Nixon's term in 1969, his approval rating was at a staggering 41%. The center of the Kent State University campus had become grounds for an anti-Vietnam War and anti-conscription rally. Diane Chen looked on as she walked to class. She said, "I was a sympathetic observer, but not actively involved in organizing anything, because my opinions on the subject just weren't strong enough." Reasons for opposition to the war ranged from objections to American intervention in other countries to people who were simply anti-violence and did not want any war in general. The most popular reason for opposition to the war was conscription. Conscription is essentially the involuntary drafting of citizens into a war. While about 2/3 of the soldiers were volunteer, the other 1/3 were selected to serve through this practice. This process was widely viewed as unfair to citizens, and considering approximately 58,220 American soldiers died during the war, it is understood why it is such a serious issue. No gatherings against involvement in the Vietnam War had ever reached the point of serious violence or casualties until the infamous protest held in the heart of Kent State University campus in 1970. The protest began as an innocent, harmless assembly. Some students, however, took it too far, and the National Guard of Ohio was called onto the campus. Chen stated that nobody believed it would get serious. When demonstrations started and storefronts were broken into, the National Guard had to intervene. Midterms were going on, and classes weren't canceled even though the National Guard was there for riots. It was unnerving. On Monday, May 4th, 1970, the National Guard chose to disperse a crowd by firing tear gas into it. The story gets a bit foggy from here, as most of what happened between this time and the time that the National Guard fired shots into the crowd is very much disputed over. Chen said that not long after the tear gas was launched by the guardsmen, she heard shots fired and everyone just got on the ground in fear of getting shot. She said that she couldn't believe that anyone was actually dead until she witnessed a student not getting off the ground after the gas and smoke cleared. Although the National Guard was indisputably not instructed to fire into the crowd, they fired approximately 67 shots and killed 4 students, all of whom were unarmed at the time. Naturally, this ignited immense anger and rioting throughout many college campuses and all over the country. The magazine Ethical Spectacle published that there was simply nothing threatening the guardsmen that justified an armed and murderous response. It was at this point that Chen gained her skepticism of the media's portrayal of events. Seeing the media claim that the students deserved what happened to them or that the guardsmen were instructed to fire when she herself witnessed the horrific event exactly as it happened was truly eye-opening for her. She now always fact-checks the news she consumes and cross-examines it with other sources to get a full picture. While Richard Nixon even admitted in his address after the shootings that he did not possess all of the knowledge about them, the media skewed what he had heard about some protesters being rough to mean that they had antagonized the guardsmen. Chen felt as though the conservative movement in the media was out to attack certain groups that were not like them and to demonize these young men and women. This is so that their opinions can be accepted and shared by the American public instead of that of the opposition. This event made an impact on Diane Chen at 19 and still impacts her today at 64. She still distrusts conservative media and is much more skeptical about the information that she reads in newspapers and online. This represents the attitude of many baby boomers because it is common to stay true to a belief that they have held since they witnessed a conflict themselves, whether it be the Kennedy assassination, the Cold War, or many other influential American events. This major tragedy in United States history made Diane Chen into the inquisitive person and critical thinker that she is today.